All right, somebody tell me, what is the cause of the Great Depression? Or maybe I should make everybody write down on a small slip of paper and hold it up so I can read it, and then I can come by and laugh at the people that put the wrong answer. So, or should I pick somebody who doesn't raise their hand? Try to I shouldn't pick you? Oh. You don't want to make everybody look bad. There's somebody you don't want to look bad. Okay, there's the cause of the Great Depression. Matthew.
Government intervention.
Government intervention. If you get nothing else, if all the rest of it is confusing, just cling to that in faith. Okay? It is government intervention. Hopefully not to cling to that in blind faith. I tried to explain to you how the government tinkering and meddling kicked this thing off. But it is government at the heart of it. That has been true of any economic downturn I've ever looked into in detail in American history. That somehow the government, there are some that were created by big swings in the gold market when our currency was tied to the value of gold. And it was government manipulation, government intervention, somehow the government involved, and there's no different here. The government is the problem. The housing market bust, when would that have been? 8 years ago? No. Wow, that was 01. 01 as Bush was coming in, when you're a little kid. That housing market bust was the government involved. Bush talked about the free market failing, which is complete fraud. It was not the free market that failed. It was government intervention that failed again. And we won't go into the details of that right now. But government intervention, that is the problem. All right, we looked at some of the details of how that happened. And the short story really is the government made it easy for people to borrow money to buy stocks. Lowered the interest rate, etc. Gave cover to the banks so that if they lost money, they would still get paid back. Made it easy for people to borrow stocks. And this allowed people to be really, really foolish. And we can't discount that people are going to be foolish. But the government is what empowered them to do so much damage. That making it easy to buy stocks caused the price of those things to go up, right? Because everybody's wanting to buy it, and it's a free market, the price goes up. And then the government reversed its position, raised the interest rate, ripped that cover away from the banks that they would get their money back if they lost it to the speculators. And we see the thing going the other direction. The other factor to weigh in here is the tariff issue and this increase in the tariff that's creeping through Congress. In the fall of that same year, it passes some major hurdles, and there was lots of fear in the business world of what that would do. So anyway, the government intervention is at the heart of it. All right, what caused it to affect all of the people that weren't stupid? All right, if Jasmine, since she wouldn't answer the question earlier, is stupid, she could have removed the doubt one way or the other, but she left us in a quandary of wondering. All right, if she was stupid and wastes her money and loses it in the stock market, to a certain extent, she got what she deserved. How does it affect all the other of us in the room that are smart and weren't stupid with their money? The bank's going bankrupt. All of us that were saving our money, we were good little children, putting our savings away for the rainy day. What's the story about the ants and the grasshopper? The ants are working and saving money for the wintertime, and the grasshopper freezes in the wintertime or something. You know, we were the ants, squirreling our money away. We were saving our money. And then the bank goes out of business, and we lose it all. Okay, so that's how this thing ripples and affects so many people who are not involved at all with the stock market. Okay, we looked at Herbert Hoover, and the Depression dominates his presidency. We see a mixed bag with his approach to it, him wanting states and local governments and businesses to do things, then eventually getting the federal government involved, and one of the things he did was cut taxes. That's good. But then he starts building things, the Hoover Dam and other stuff, trying to stimulate the economy. All right, so a very mixed bag with his approach there. FDR refers to him, let me get the phrase right, the greatest spending administration in all our history, because of all the money he spent on the Hoover Dam and some of these projects. It really is ironic to... It was the highest up until that point. FDR blows him away. But up until that point it was. Maybe that was meant to be a compliment. I don't know. So a very mixed bag. Then we looked at his foreign affairs there, the tariff, the same tariff that we saw create the unstable environment that kicked the Depression off, and then the war debts, and essentially everybody just starts defaulting on them except for Finland, and we never get repaid. All right, today we want to jump into FDR and look at the New Deal. We should be able to easily get through the New Deal. It wasn't as easy for them to live through it, but we should be able to cover it easily today. Let me read for you a quote. Franklin Roosevelt, he's in from 33 to 44, wins 4 elections here for president. We have now a constitutional amendment limiting it to 2 because of this. Up until that point, it was just president. Washington stepped out after 2, and everybody held to that. Let me give you a quote from our textbook. Location 13889, whatever, I don't know what page that is. This is talking about the New Deal. It says, rather, a single theme underlay all of them, talking about the New Deal policies, namely that government could and should do things that citizens previously had done for themselves. Right? The government taking responsibility for our lives. We're seeing that even more to this day, but instead of you being careful where you put your money and picking a bank that's going to be secure, the government's going to ensure that all the banks are secure, and you no longer have to think about it. And instead of you working hard and paying your bills and buying food for your house, the government's going to give you money to pay your bills and buy food for your family, etc. So the government stepping more and more into our lives and doing things. So that was our textbook's summary of the idea. Let's run down through some of the major pieces of this thing. I have for FDR, I have a bad outline. I have Roman number 1, the New Deal, and there's no 2. Right? We'll just talk about the New Deal. Well, I guess really there is a second point. We didn't talk about his foreign policy yet, but his foreign policy is World War II. So we will talk about World War II separately. But for him, just the New Deal, that dominates his presidency up until that point. And underneath the New Deal, I've got several things to talk about. All right, the first is the 100 days. Anybody remember a president like Obama being analyzed 100 days into his presidency and talking about how much he got accomplished? Nobody? Okay. It does happen. You'll get a chance here, hopefully next year. There will be a new president, and 100 days into it, very often there'll be some reports, the first 100 days, what's happened. It's hearkening back to this. In his first 100 days, he is able to smash through Congress the bulk here of the New Deal. I'll try to give you some dates and things, but the whole first wave of this is in the first 100 days. So we go from him calling FDR as the greatest spender in American history to the New Deal in 100 days of his presidency. At this point, the president didn't take office until March. This particular one was March the 4th of 32. He took office. This is the last time. After this point, it moved back to January like it is today, and that was just a constitutional thing. So he takes office in March, and then the first 100 days after that point, we see this New Deal legislation just flowing through Congress. We bashed our current representatives and senators about Obamacare and some of those things because they didn't read them. Remember that whole issue? They didn't read them. They don't even take a pretense here in some cases of reading these things. It's FDR wants it. Let's push it through and pass it. So the first 100 days. Let me give you a few details about it beyond what I just said. On March, he takes office on March the 4th. On March the 9th, he calls a special session of Congress. It is strange for us to think that Congress will not be in session, but at this point they weren't meeting. So he calls them back in, particularly to deal with the New Deal. And this session goes from March the 9th to June the 16th. And in this window is when he pushes much legislation through. Let me give you, he is advised here and all through his presidency by a group of professors, and they're all stupid and ignorant. You can't trust anything they say. I'm not a professor. I don't have a degree, so it's Dr. Mitchell. He's a professor. He's stupid and ignorant. I'm kidding. He had a group of advisors, mostly college professors. They're called the Brain Trust because supposedly they were the smartest men in the room. They really knew what was happening. There is a real danger in academia of coming up with things that sound good that don't actually work. Right? And that's what these guys have done. They came up with some ideas that sounded good, but they didn't actually work. Right? And in economics and social areas, it's harder sometimes to see that it doesn't work. And that's why liberals dominate those areas, because they come up with ideas that don't work. If you're an engineer and you come up with an idea that doesn't work, it's very easy to see because your building falls over or the bridge collapses or the engine doesn't start, or it's a physical thing, and if your idea doesn't work, it's very obvious. All right, here in economics and other things, it's not so obvious. You can still see how it doesn't work, but it's not quite as obvious. So we get a bunch of guys here who have these great ideas that are just completely disconnected from reality. All right, these guys. There's one particular name I should give you, John Maynard Keynes. Keynes. Anybody know that name? Just one? You know anything about it?
He invented the common Keynesian theory, which dominated economics from like the early 1930s all the way to modern day.
Yeah. the idea of economics called Keynesian economics is named after him. The short description of that is that in a depression time, the government should spend lots of money to stimulate the economy. If there's not enough jobs for people, the government needs to come in and build things. We saw a little bit of that idea with Hoover, with the dam and other things that he built. We see it magnified here many times over. So with Keynes, another British guy. We fought a war with them. We should have left them over there. Let me read you another quote here. This is also from a textbook I thought was interesting. Roosevelt was talking to one of these advisors. He said, Roosevelt told Moley that he, and here's the quote, had talked to a great many businessmen. In fact, to more than any other president. And they, the businessmen, are generally stupid. Ford and others who build these big companies. They're idiots. This brain trust, these college professors who sit in their office and think about how to build a big business and how it should operate and how it's fair, and they're the ones he's going to take his advice from. Sorry. I'm thinking of some conversations I've had in the past with people who were flat broke, talking to some people who had started a business, and they were telling that guy how to run their business. And I remember thinking, this is the people that had started their own business and were very successful. They just smiled and went along with it. But it was extremely ironic. Okay, buddy, you can't pay your own bills. Right? Maybe the advice should go the other direction. But anyway, we have essentially that here. The people who are college professors that have no experience, looking at the people who have actually done this and thinking they're stupid. So, all right, so the 100 days, he pushes this stuff through with the advice here of these college professors and others who are very, very disconnected from reality. All right, next year we'll look at some pieces of this New Deal, and I've got them chunked off in kind of topics that go together to talk about, to lay out how he puts this thing together. The first area is banking and finance. For my outline, this is the second main point, banking and finance. I have the 100 days and banking and finance, and we'll talk about a government-planned economy, etc. Banking and finance. All right, first thing here, this is on March the 9th. Congress gives him this power. The first day, he calls them back on the first day, gives him power to declare a bank holiday, which what that meant was banks would close until the government deemed they were fit and safe to reopen. We've had literally thousands of banks going bankrupt. So here he just closed them all until they could get their books in order and have enough cash on hand, etc., so that they could open and not be at risk of going bankrupt. A bank holiday. Now, I'm all for banks being fit and safe and not going bankrupt, but this is a massive overreach by the government. All of this is a massive overreach. All right, so bank holiday. The second thing deals with inflation. And this comes along on June the 5th, that the dollar was taken off the gold standard. Anybody, well, prior to this point, we had a direct connection. A dollar was worth a certain amount of gold, directly connected. That kind of backed the government into a corner. I mean, if they wanted to print more money, they had to have more gold. It limited how much they could meddle with the money supply. Right? What we did is removed the requirement to have the gold actually on hand, and lets the government just print money without any real backing. So the government now can just begin printing more and more money. If that somehow strikes you as, maybe not moral or ethical, yeah, that's the right way to think about it. I mean, we go to jail for that. All right, and if you read the Constitution carefully, it's not constitutionally allowed for the government to do that type of thing. They can print paper money, but it's got to be backed by gold. But really, what this allows then the government to do is meddle with the value of money. We see here by 1934 about a 40% drop in the value of money. So if you were going to go buy something that was $1 in easy figures, it would cost you $1.40 to buy it. Right? The dollar was worth less. You could buy less with it. So you're getting a candy bar for $1, and at the end of this first year, it's costing you $1.40. Right? So it allows the government to print more money, and it causes that kind of inflation. To me, an easy way to think about it is restaurant. We talked about that before. Things go for crazy prices up there because there's lots of money. Everybody's got money that they have to spend. As soon as you get out of that little bubble, right, things go back to normal. And this creates that artificial bubble where prices go up. You might have more dollars in your pocket, but everything costs you more. And in the end, you have no more buying power. But it gives the government a great opportunity to meddle. And that really is the way to think of this, stripping the dollar off the gold standard. What caused the Great Depression? Even Jasmine should know this at this point. Government intervention, government meddling. And here's more of that. This whole New Deal is government meddling. Now, I do need to mention, at least your textbook defends this. The argument they make is that all the other countries in the world had pulled their dollar off their currencies off the gold standard. So what was happening is, Lawrence lived in England, right? So we'll make you the evil British guy. You take British dollars, which are backed by nothing, convert them to U.S. dollars, which are backed by gold, and then he exchanges it for the gold and walks off with the gold. So the argument was made, well, there was such a massive pressure being put upon our government we had to keep acquiring this gold to back our currency with it, that this made sense. I can understand the predicament put us in, but I can't imagine there wasn't some other way around it without just stripping it off the gold standard. So anyway, you will, or I forget if have you already read through that part? I've lost track of where we are. Stephanie's saying yes. Anybody remember that? Okay, so anyway, they do defend it. I don't completely buy it, but at least mention it. Okay, so we have banking and finance, the holiday and inflation there, the government being able to meddle with the economy by stripping it off the gold standard. All right, the next area is a government-planned economy. We're going to have the government directly meddling with what's produced, how it's produced, who produces it, etc. All right, we'll look at 3 examples of things here. The first one comes along on May the 18th of that 100 days. It's called the Tennessee Valley Authority. The Tennessee Valley Authority. It dealt with the Tennessee Valley, just like it sounds. All of these agencies often get referred to by their acronyms. This would be the TVA. We're going to talk about the National Recovery Administration next, the NRA, very different than a different NRA. They're often mockingly referred to as the alphabet soup agencies, and the idea was you could take a bowl of alphabet soup and pull 3 letters out and come up with an agency. that was the idea, any 3 letters. So, the Tennessee Valley Authority. May the 18th, this one is done. What it did was it gave the government the authority to build and operate a hydroelectric dam along the Tennessee River. Does anybody know what it's called when the government builds and operates pieces of industry? Socialism. Yeah, socialism, and that's the classic definition of socialism: the government ownership and ownership of parts of the economy. All right, so just direct government ownership. Again, they argued that we have to build the hydroelectric dam, so there's going to be all kinds of people that get work because of this. In the Tennessee Valley, there are a bunch of backwood hicks down there. They're stupid and can't get jobs on their own. So we're going to provide jobs for them. You look like you got mad at me all of a sudden. Man, that's my family. They need jobs down there, so we're going to provide jobs. And then once the thing is built, we'll be able to provide lower cost electricity for them. So this is a win-win for everybody. Okay. Now, anytime the government starts spending money, remember that the money comes from somebody else. It does not come out of just thin air. If they're giving Lawrence money, it's coming from somebody else in the room here. All right. So whatever benefit these people see is offset by other people losing money. All right, so there's no net gain here. At best, it's a wash. In reality, it's worse than that. Yeah.
I saw a quote by Margaret Thatcher. She said, "The problem with socialism is that you eventually run out of
other people's money." That's a very good quote. You do eventually run out of other people's money. So. All right, that was the Tennessee Valley Authority. The next one is the National Recovery Administration, the NRA. This one's on June the 16th, barely squeaked it in. All right, the National Recovery Administration, this does a couple of things. Let me first of all give you just kind of a general goal. It's the mission that this agency was given. The basic job was to remove the unfair competition that existed between businesses. I'm not sure exactly how you define unfair. It'd be like going to the NBA and I've lost track of the Warriors. Are they still on track to beat the Bulls record? Be like going to the NBA and saying, we're going to remove the unfair competition that exists. What exactly do they mean? Do they mean that somehow the Warriors are cheating? Are they poisoning the other players? Are the scorekeepers cheating? All right. Really what they're saying is it's unfair for the Warriors to be so successful. So we're going to do things to make them less successful is what they're saying. They're not really implying here that somebody's cheating. They're just saying we're going to, this excessive competition, it's too bad. Competition is a vital part of a free market. Imagine the NBA if there was no competition. If each of the teams just got to field, each of the owners, they got to field a team, and they would have a parade or something and maybe some demonstration of their ability, and then there was a national vote to decide who the champion was or something. Try to imagine no competition. Well, then there's no NBA, okay? And really, without competition, there's no free market. It's a vital part of it. It forces companies to be good or they fail. So anyway, this is to remove the unfair competition. Unfair was the word they used. All right, let me give you 2 particular things it did. First of all, it gave the president the authority to begin regulating or maybe continue and expand the regulation of businesses, different parts, different industries. Yeah, it gave the president power to regulate industries. We'd already seen the beginnings of this, but it gets expanded here. The way it worked is different industries, the textile industry or whatever, the hat makers guild, all the different industries. They were told that they could come up with some regulations voluntarily, things that they would all agree to abide by, working conditions, wage rates, etc. they could get together, come up with these regulations, and submit them to the president. So that technically it was a voluntary thing, sort of. The other side of it was if they didn't, then the president would do it for them, or his minions. So they were told that they could do this voluntarily, but if they didn't do it voluntarily, the president was going to come up with these regulations. So anyway, it gave the president your power to begin regulating, hours of work, conditions of labor, pay, all kinds of things. Here, somehow removing competition. All right, and then the other thing it did is it stipulated that an employer cannot prevent his employees from forming a union. If who should we pick here? We've had a couple evil business owners already, haven't we? Who wants to be the next one? Thomas is always willing to be the evil guy. I'm not so sure that he's just willing to pretend. Oh, that's it. It's such a foreign concept that he wants to try to understand it. That's not what we were thinking. We just thought you felt comfortable there. What's that? Yeah, it didn't allow, an employer cannot prevent his employees from forming a union. So he owns a factory building something, widgets or something. And his employees get together and they form a union and they stand outside and picket and say, we're not going to work unless you pay us a certain amount of money. He couldn't say to those employees, I'm not going to hire anybody that works for that joins the union. He wasn't allowed to say that. If they formed a union, he was forced to deal with it. Now, I do think the employees should be free to form a union. It's a free country. But he's also in a free country. Right? If he doesn't want to deal with the union, or if the union makes crazy demands, he can just say, fine, forget it. I'm going to hire people not in your union. But the government here was saying he could not do that. If you've heard recently, in recent years, some states adopting right-to-work laws, all right, it's undoing some of this. I mean, this has been the condition for a very long time, where if your employees voted to join a union, there was nothing you could do. You could not say to them, I'm going to fire you if you join the union, or I'm not going to hire people that join the union. You could not do that. But this starts way back here. I knew a guy that worked at there's a place in Valpo that makes cardboard boxes. And there was a movement amongst the employees at certain points to join a union. And he didn't want to do it, but he laughed at, they had to be very, very secretive about it, because if the owners got wind of it, they couldn't go to the employee and say, you're fired because of your union activities, but they would come up with some reason, and that guy would be gone. So they had to be very, very careful how they talked about it, because the owners knew that if they were able if the workers got the vote together and they agreed to the union, they were stuck with it. So they fought it tooth and nail. So anyway, NRA. Owners could not get rid of employees. I'm sorry, Thomas. There's another avenue of evil cut off from you. All right, one last thing here under government planned economy. The Agricultural Adjustment Administration. I think sometimes it's good to step back and think this is all supposed to get us out of the Great Depression. Remember, the Great Depression was caused by government intervention into the economy. This is really, like smashing your big toe with a hammer, and to make it quit hurting, you smashed all the toes on the other foot, and then a thumb or something. I guess maybe at a certain point, the initial blow doesn't hurt as bad. It was massive government intervention. All right, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, such a nice, innocuous-sounding name. The goal of this was to keep the price of farm goods high, up to a certain level. Food, we're talking about food. You want to keep corn up to a certain level, and beans and soybeans and wheat or whatever the product is. Beef, cotton, pork, those types of products. They want to keep the price high. The argument always presented by socialists is if the agricultural market falls too low, then all the farmers are going to go out of business and will starve to death. So they say, well, we've got to have some laws in place to make sure the prices stay up to a certain point. All right, can anybody think what's going to happen if the price of farm goods go too low and a bunch of farmers go out of business? Are we going to starve to death? What's going to happen? It's a wide open answer, but question.
Is this just applied to America? Or are we going to buy it from foreign?
Okay, well, just pretend it's America.
Do we buy it from other?
I mean, just let's say we can't do that. What's going to happen? He said we can buy it from other countries. That's true.
Are we regulated by one business, and that business will dominate the market?
Communist. As long as it's a free market, I'm all for it. That's a little bit open-ended question, so I don't blame you for it.
Prices will back up.
Yeah, if half the farmers go out of business and the next year half the food is produced, you know, we all go to the grocery store and there's half as many ears of corn there, the price is going to go back up. So this fear of prices are going to just go down and never recover it's Alice in Wonderland stuff. It's crazy, okay? But that's the fear. Well, we got to keep the price of these goods up high enough. I think I read you the quote by William Jennings Bryan about, you know, knock all of your cities down and they'll spring up from the rubble, but get rid of the farms and the cities will become empty or something like that. You know, that same idea. So anyway, that is the thought behind this. We've got to keep the price of these goods high. All right, let me give you a couple examples of what they did. The government paid farmers to plow under about 10 million acres of cotton. It is in the field growing, and the government paid them to just plow it under. That does cause the price of cotton to go up. Right? All right, but again, we're in a depression. I'm not sure how that helps.
How many acres is that?
About 10 million. 10 million. Now think of the raw deal here if you're not a cotton farmer. Let's say you work in a factory in Chicago. The government takes your money, gives it to the cotton farmer, and the benefit you get is to pay more for cotton. It's not like you're joining a Sam's Club or something, you get a discounted rate. You're paying more for cotton. Okay, now, again, if you think about what's happening here, it's really hard to figure out how this helps the economy. This is to get us out of the depression, supposedly. It's hard to connect the dots.
Why doesn't the government just keep the cotton on reserve
For the future, some...
for something like that?
Well, that's too hard. That makes too much sense. They also kill Wilbur, too. I think it's Wilbur in Charlotte's Web, is the name of the pig. The same idea. They killed about 6 million pigs. And they didn't kill them and have bacon. They destroyed them to keep the price of pork high. I agree. It's stupid. It's liberalism. What's that?
Animal abuse.
Animal abuse. Where's PETA when we needed them? So, all right, so they began doing stuff like that. Again, think of if you're the farmer, this is a great thing. You're getting paid to apply your crops on. You don't have to harvest them. Right? The next year when you go to plant crops, the price of cotton is much higher than it was because of the shortage. So you're selling crops at a higher profit. I mean, this is a win-win for the farmer. All right, but it hurts everybody else.
How many pigs were killed?
6 million, roughly. Just think of the slaughter. That's not the bad. Think of the waste. All the bacon, all the sausage gravy, all the hams. If some of you are thinking about some of the other pieces that come out of a pig, I don't want to hear about it. You know, the intestines and the chitlin. Those who get wasted, right? The meat, I want that stuff. So, all right, Agricultural Adjustment Administration. Questions about that? Please don't ask me to explain how it makes sense.
Who exactly killed the pigs? Was it the farmers killing the pigs, or was it the actual government trying to have the pigs taken to another?
I don't know who actually did the killing. It was the government paid for it to get it, so I don't.
The smart farmers could have just killed the pigs and then, like taken all the meat they wanted and
Destroyed the rest.
It was concentration.
You talking about government corruption? That wouldn't happen. Concentration camps? They had a pig ghetto. Oh, it's just like Animal Farm.
I'm sure they went hog wild.
Oh no, we need some help. Okay, government planned economy. Questions there? You can see the government, instead of being a referee, as they should be, really, a sports analogy is a very good one. Instead of being a referee, they began to meddle. I mean, it'd be like Friday. The refs saying, "Oh, the Fairhaven guys are so bad at basketball. We just randomly assign them points if they manage to get 2 dribbles in a row or so." Just that's true, but they would feel better about it. Yeah, that's not the government's job to meddle with the results of the game. All right, they're to be the referee. And here we have the government meddling with results. The very thing that caused the Depression is the solution. All right, let's go on here. 100 days, banking, finance, government planned economy. The next piece to look at is relief to the common man. And this is the last piece of the initial wave of legislation in the New Deal. Relief to the common man. This is direct relief. More money aimed, not trying to keep the price of pig meat high or something like that. This is money being much more directly given to people. The first one is the Federal Emergency Relief Act. This gave direct money to the unemployed, or gave money directly to the unemployed. I'm not sure what direct money is. Gave money directly to the unemployed. FERA, F-E-R-A. Another example here is the Civilian Conservation Corporation. This is aimed at young men. Sorry, girls. I guess I'm out of this one too. It provided jobs for young men. They did all kinds of construction project type things. Flood control, building pathways in national parks and bridges over streams and that kind of stuff. All kinds of those types of projects. CCC. There's a man named Gary, Mr. Hightower, I forget his last first name, who was in a CCC camp as a young man. He had a picture of his group. I'm sure there's a name for it. All right, so Civilian Conservation Corporation. Before I give you the third example here, all of these, the argument is if we give money to the unemployed, they'll be able to buy food for their families and all that kind of good stuff. And that money is going to stimulate the economy. The baker's going to get business because the unemployed guy had money, et cetera, et cetera. But remember, that money is coming from someplace else. So whatever benefit we see there is offset by money being taken from someplace else. So, all right, last one. The Public Works Administration. This ends up being a massive thing. Public works is any type of public building project, building a hospital, a government-owned hospital, building a road, airport, that type of thing, schools. And they build thousands of things across the country. There was at least one project in every county except for 33 across the whole country. There were 33 counties that did not have some project paid for and built by this Public Works Administration, and many of them had multiple projects. Okay, Public Works Administration. The Hoover Dam would be an example of public works. That just was started by Hoover. If it had been started by Roosevelt, it'd be the Roosevelt Dam today. Okay, so we have the New Deal. More government intervention to save us from the glories of the previously experienced pains of government intervention. All right. It did not work at all. It did not work at all. And that's my next main point. By 1935, we have the New Deal coming in 33, the spring and early summer of 33. Roughly 2 years later, this thing doesn't, it's not working. Just like the stimulus package didn't work. It's never going to work. It'd be like, I don't know, making balloons out of lead and, just trying to tinker with, the thickness of the balloon or something in order to get them to float. It's never going to happen, okay? It's never going to get us out. So by 1935, it hadn't worked. So the solution that FDR put forward in Congress along with was a second wave of legislation. It's called the Second New Deal. We're not going to go through it in as much detail. We'll mention a couple of things. But it's more of the same, really. Weren't getting ourselves out of the Depression, so we will do more. Let me give you a couple of things that were done here. First is just a general statement. The amount spent on public works was increased. more of these government building projects. Okay, another thing that was done here is labor unions were given more support by the government. We saw already that happening with the NRA, but we see it increasing. There was a board set up called the National Labor Relations Board, which we still hear about, that was there to push the union agenda. This is a quote from your textbook. The act in Congress that set that board up is called the Wagner Act. Your book said, the Wagner Act thus threw the entire weight of government behind the unions, a 180-degree turn from the position in the late 1800s. All right, so the governments began to push and support unions. All right, so we have more of that. Another thing we have added here is Social Security being added. In theory, this is a retirement program where the government forces you to save your money. They take it from you and save it for you so that when you retire, they can give you your money back. In practice, it's a gigantic Ponzi scheme for which many members of Congress should go to jail for fraud. Right. It's just another tax is all it is. The government takes your money and they do what they want to with it. I remember Al Gore, anytime he speaks, it's kind of funny, but when he was running for president, he talked about the Social Security lockbox and how he was going to make sure that when your Social Security taxes were collected, it was actually saved. And what he meant by that was he was going to have a lockbox and he was going to put in there an IOU. You know, we owe Stephanie this much money, and put it in there. And he'll say, look, your money's in the lockbox, and he's going to go spend the money. And then if you really want to understand government and how it gets confusing when they go to balance their books, they count the money in the lockbox, these IOU slips, as real money, and then they go spend the money. So they get to count it twice. Try that with, with your bank. It doesn't work. But anyway, Social Security was started. Two more things here with the second New Deal. Minimum wage was set. Your textbook said this: more than any other single policy, the minimum wage law cemented unemployment levels that were nearly twice those of 1929. Right? A minimum wage. It's something that today the argument too often is how much should it be increased? I would love to have Ted Cruz or somebody come out and say, I think we should abolish it. I mean, that really is the only sane minimum wage, zero. But it does create unemployment. That's a topic for another day, but it's very, very bad for the economy. It's good for the particular employees. They get more money. In a sense, it's good for them. But it hurts drastically other places. So minimum wage. The last thing here with the second New Deal is that taxes were increased. The top rate went up to 79% and then later to 90%. So if you made enough money so that you hit that top bracket, everything from that point on, you're paying 79% of it in taxes. Right? Insanity. Okay, so the first New Deal didn't work. Second New Deal comes along to save us. It doesn't work. So, all right, we got a couple more things here to talk about with the New Deal. The next one is the New Deal is a complete failure. All right, it never works. Then we'll talk about the Supreme Court, and then we'll talk about some results of the New Deal beyond just the economic ones. But the next point is the New Deal was a complete failure. All right, any way you slice it, any way you analyze it, is a complete failure. Don't believe the propaganda that the New Deal pulled us out of the recession, the Great Depression. It just like that quote about the minimum wage laws, it cemented us into the Great Depression. The government meddled and gave us the Depression, and then it meddled and held us at this low level. Before FDR comes along with the New Deal, there was already turning around of things. There was beginning to be a recovery, and he blesses us with this New Deal, and it's bam, right back to where it was. It held us into this position. It did not get us out of it. So let me give you some bits and pieces and things about this. Roosevelt's Secretary of the Treasury made this statement in 1939. You don't have to necessarily write it down. Talking about how much it was a failure. We have tried spending money. We are spending more than we have ever spent before, and it does not work. We have never made good on our promises. I say after 8 years of this administration, we have just as much unemployment as when we started, and an enormous debt to boot. Now, that was an election year, so you got to weigh that in. But he was his Secretary of the Treasury pointed out the fact that this has been a complete failure. At that point, the unemployment rate was 20%. All right, massively high. All right, some other things here. The unemployment rate in 1931, a year and a half or so after the crash, was 17.4%. After 5 years of the New Deal and the second New Deal, it's still 17.4%. It had gone nowhere. And if you're wondering if that's just, pick the lowest number before and the highest after, the average for that whole time frame was 17.2. Right. So, waste all this money and we get nowhere. The stock market, before the crash, tops out at 380. Bottoms out at 48. In 1930, it's back up to 250. It was coming back. January of 1940, it was still 151. Right, so, never recovered. The New Deal cemented us into that place. All right, one other thing to mention is, still with it being a complete failure, government spending goes up drastically during this time frame. In 1929, these numbers are really small compared to today, but in 1929, the government spent 2.5% of the gross domestic product. If you take all of the products produced in America and take their value, the government spending was 2.5% of that. In 1936, after the first and the second New Deal, it goes up to 9%, which is 3.5 roughly times increase. Today we're up to like 30% of the gross domestic product or more, but we have a massive increase in the amount of money our government spends, and starts a snowball that we still haven't recovered from.
What was the percentage?
2.5 in 29 and 9% in 36. Okay, so it's complete failure. Does not pull us out of the economy, it cements us there, and it turns what a lot of economists think would have been about a 3-year downturn into this 10-year thing that really it's after World War II before we really come out of this thing. Okay, so complete failure. The next thing to talk about is court opposition. The Supreme Court here begins to not be so happy with this thing, and Roosevelt jams it full. All right, starting in 1935, the Supreme Court began to challenge some of these New Deal policies, and very, very justly so. This is blatantly unconstitutional. Begins to challenge these things. And so what Roosevelt's idea was that he should get to pick a new justice for the 6 justices that were 70 or older. Those 6 would still keep their spots, but he'd put a new one in. Want to get some young blood in there so they can get some experience. Basically, he wanted to pick some people in there so they would stop overturning this stuff. That was his plan. Congress surprisingly doesn't go along with this. They refuse to allow this. But over the course of Roosevelt's terms, he appoints 9 justices. So he gets even more than he was hoping for at that point. So he appoints 9. So he was able to, through the years, take this court opposition and completely melt it away by appointing his own judges and people that would agree with him. So anyway, the Supreme Court opposition does fade away with that. Last thing here about the New Deal is some results of this. We already talked about it being a failure, but just some more results to America that we've had here. Okay, 4 things. First of all, we have the government gaining more control over the economy, more socialistic policies. That's always the liberal answer. If college tuition is too high, we need a government program. It's always more. We need to regulate it. So we have more government control. Again, that's what caused it. We get more of it. All right, the second thing is kind of a philosophical one, is that people began to look to the government to solve their problems instead of themselves. Think of, there are whole segments of our society that if they don't have a job, they think the government should provide one for them. It never enters their mind seriously that they should maybe finish high school, get some training in some trade that people will pay you for, and go find a job. They look to the government to save them from all their problems, or people that borrowed more money than their house is worth. There's some stupid loans that were given out, but imagine if I had a house that's worth $100,000 and I had borrowed $150,000. If I sell my house, I'm still stuck with $50,000 worth of debt to pay off. So what do I do? All right, the typical response is, let's go to the government and make the government will make the bank change my loan. Right? And it's a very, very, very bad mindset. If you get to the point where the government is the only place you have to get help, you have truly hit rock bottom. Okay, if you get to that bad, show up on Thursdays when the food bank is open here, and we'll at least give you a bag of food, and it's someplace other than the government. Right? You've really hit rock bottom. But that mindset begins to enter our society. That the government, they're the ones that are going to help us. If we don't have food, they're going to help us. If we can't pay your utility bills, they're going to help us. If we don't have a high school diploma, they're going to whatever. The government is going to help us. It's a very, very dangerous place to go, and it pushes us that direction. All right, third thing, a very practical thing here is that blacks began to vote very heavily Democratic during this New Deal time frame. Hoover won the black vote, and Roosevelt in 36, his second term, gets 76% of it. Why would it not be surprising that the Republicans would dominate the black vote? Yeah, the Republican Party was the one that stood against slavery. The Democrats defended it. All right, but it was in this New Deal era that we see that switch taking place. And today it's just taken for granted. Yes, the black communities are going to vote for the Democrat. It's 95, 96% very often. Okay, and then the fourth thing we see here, we can trace this other places, but definitely see an increase of this. Something that's referred to as crony capitalism. That's used very loosely by all kinds of things. But basically, businessmen began to invest large amounts of time and money to influence the government to give them certain benefits or privileges. Okay? If the government is regulating your particular industry, and you go to Congress and you take out the right senator and the right congressman, and you donate money to the right guy's campaign, then they introduce legislation that's going to benefit you. All right, that type of thing. The more the government's involved, the more businessmen have to do that type of thing. And again, it's not necessarily evil for businessmen to do that, but the government can regulate them so heavily that they have to be involved. People always talk about, we got to get the money out of politics. The big problem is there's too much for sale. Right? If we got the government out of doing all of these things, there'd be no reason for Ford to hire lobbyists to be in D.C. If Congress had no ability to regulate the way they made cars, which is the way it should be, there's no reason to go there. That money is going to evaporate. So anyway, it pushes us that direction. I just heard of an example that I thought about dealing with us. If you live in the area, you might have seen signs about no hotel or no resort, no banquet center at the beach. Okay, the guy that's doing that used to be the Porter County Republican chairman. He's wanted to build this banquet center, and he's been turned down for a liquor license by all the local municipalities that can give them. So what he has done, and I haven't heard the end of this one, I don't know what happened. He went down to the Indiana legislature, which is dominated by Republicans, and got them to pass a law saying that the state park could issue a liquor license against the wishes of the local communities. Right? Crony capitalism. He's going to the government to get them to pass some law to benefit him. I have not heard the end of it, but that was the route he was going. All the communities around us don't want it, and so they're going to the state. And that's the way it is right now. There are other state parks where there's a hotel or something that has a liquor license, but the local communities gave it to him. It's a local decision. And he's going around that and getting the state. So anyway, that type of thing is increased over and over and over. And it's the Republicans. That is, oh well. All right, so results of the New Deal. The last thing I want to mention for FDR has nothing to do with the New Deal directly, other than maybe philosophically, is that a very strong communist ties, very strong. People very high in his administration, special advisors. I just lost the name of the guy. The guy that negotiated the UN. Our representative, I'll think of his name later. Our representative at the negotiations that organized the UN was a Soviet spy. Right. Massive infiltration. He was informed of it many times. His typical response was either to just ignore it or many times give those people promotions. All right. Massive infiltration. For a long time, it was just speculated, and liberals said, oh, it was all made up. It really wasn't true. If you think of wow, my mind is gone. Senator McCarthy hunting down the Soviet spies and all of the witch hunting that was supposedly happened. After the Soviet Union collapsed, their documentation and all this paperwork starts to become public. And we now know from the Soviet side that it was probably worse than the Republicans were claiming. I mean, if anything, the Republicans and McCarthy and others were understating the problem. Right, this is massive infiltration all over his administration with Soviet spies. And it doesn't get any better afterwards. Once we get into the Cold War era, there's just massive, massive infiltration. So, okay, got to mention that with FDR. Questions at all about the New Deal? If you get completely stuck on your final, just put something about how it's really stupid, and then at least give me, you get some points, right? Please. What's that?
Talk about how it wasted a lot.
Yeah, you could say, lots of farm breakfasts were destroyed for no reason. All right, we will pick up tomorrow with World War II.